How are you, my class 10 English version students? We are going to start our new chapter. New chapter is the exchange of gas, and we also in the previous class our respiratory system. I just explained the respiratory system and its organs. Okay. Now today I am going to start our new topics. Our new topics is 7.2.2, and this topic is the breathing. And there are the basically many process. First is the external respiration, another is the internal respiration. We also know about the external respiration and internal respiration, and again it says the another topics is the exhalation and inhalation. I just explained about this, the exhalation and inhalation. First, our topics is the external respiration. I want to explain the external respiration. Here, there are two types of the structure in the human body. First structure is the inhaling, and another type is the exhaling. Inhaling, basically there are the three categories or three types. First is the diaphragm. There the students please see the books. This structure is the diaphragm, and this structure is the thoracic cavity, and the another structure is the muscles. Basically it's also the another muscles. Please everyone see the books. I just see the books and I also explain it. First is the breathing. All the organs related to breathing remain open only through the pharynx. What is the pharynx? I just draw this. This structure is basically pharynx, and this structure is also the another type is pharynx. The other ends of the organs remains closed. The air enters air sacs of the lungs easily through the nasal passages. Here's this structure is the nasal passage. Okay, and nasal passage nerve impulses. Basically, the nerve impulses help in maintaining breathing. The intercostal muscles. I also explained the previous. The intercostal muscles. Basically, this structure is the intercostal muscles, and with the rib. Here, this structure is the rib. Another, I also see this structure is the intercostal muscles. Okay, and with that, and diaphragm contract. Intercostal muscles and the diaphragm contract. Here, this is the intercostal muscles and the diaphragm contracts. Then it's also the happening. What's the happening? Then is the diaphragm goes downwards and the thoracic cavity expands. When the diaphragm down, this structure is down, then is the thoracic cavity. This structure is the thoracic cavity, and it's also the expands. Then what's the happen? Then basically, and the diaphragm goes downwards and the thoracic cavity expands. The volume of the thoracic cavity increases and the air pressure decreases. This structure is basically increases and the air structure is the decreases. And so the pressure within the thoracic cavity becomes less than the outer atmospheric pressure. Outer atmospheric pressure, basically this structure is the outer atmospheric pressure. And then this forces the lungs to expand and draw in air through the nose and trachea. When the lungs expands, here also state the lungs. When the lungs expands, then the air through the nose and trachea. This is inhaling. Now we also know about the inhaling. What is the inhaling? When the trachea and lungs expands, then it's also the another name is inhaling. After the contraction, the muscles relax. Then after that, the muscles or the contraction of the muscles relax. This structure is relaxed. Then the diaphragm expands and the muscles relax. and the diaphragm expands and the muscles relax, and allowing the diaphragm and thorax to return to normal position. So the air pressure increases. In the few term I also explained the air pressure decreases. Now the air pressure increases, the lung shrinks back, forcing the moistened and carbon dioxide enriched air out again. Then the carbon dioxide enriched the out again. Here the oxygen also the inner side and the carbon dioxide is also the outer side. Here this is external respiration. Dear students, there are two types. I also explained a few times ago. There are two types. First is the external respiration and the internal respiration. In the external respiration, I also explained there are three parts. First is the thoracic cavity, second is the diaphragm and the muscles, and the contracts and the expands. Our next structure is basically it's also the very important topics for you the final exam or test exam. This structure is basically the internal respiration. Here the internal respiration, there are basically two forms. First is the absorption of oxygen and second is the carbon dioxide transport. Please everyone see the books. How can the absorption of oxygen? Gaseous exchange. Their structure is first structure is gaseous exchange. Here the gaseous exchange means the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide. It occurs in between the air and blood vessels of the lungs. Gaseous exchange occurs in two types: the absorption of oxygen and the giving out of expelling of carbon dioxide. First structure is absorption of oxygen. How can the absorb of oxygen? Here, gaseous exchange in the lungs takes place through diffusion. In the blood, oxygen does not remain free. A large amount of oxygen combines with the hemoglobin of the red blood corpuscles and forms oxyhemoglobin. Here I just also see this, the oxyhemoglobin. How can they form the oxyhemoglobin? I just erase this structure of the external respiration. Now I also explain the internal respiration. Here the first structure is absorption of oxygen. Here the first structure is hemoglobin, then it's also add the oxygen, then it's called the oxyhemoglobin. I just draw this oxyhemoglobin. Okay. Here the structure hemoglobin in the of the red blood corpuscles and forms oxyhemoglobin. This is a basically temporary compound. Production of these compounds depends on the concentration of oxygen in the plasma. Basically, we also know there are in the blood there are basically two types structure. First structure is plasma and second structure is the corpuscles. During blood transport, a large amount of oxygen diffuses from the plasma to the lymph. Another structure is lymph. This happens when the oxygen concentration in the lymph is less. So the oxygen concentration in the plasma becomes less. Then hemoglobin begins to give up oxygen which was bound with it. In this way, at first, oxygen enters the plasma and then into the lymph or intercellular fluid. Steps which occur during oxygen transportation and described below. Again, I also described below. How can oxygen absorb? The oxygen of gases between alveoli and blood and tissue occurs by diffusion. Diffusion of gases takes place due to a gas pressure differences between alveoli and blood. After entering into the blood, from the lungs, dissolved oxygen flows in two ways. There are flows in two ways. Basically, a small amount of oxygen flows in the plasma and most of the oxygen makes a loose bond with the iron part of hemoglobin and forms of temporary compound. Again I repeat, temporary compound is also called the oxyhemoglobin. From oxyhemoglobin, oxygen separately easily. Here the hemoglobin is the short briefing is the HB and the oxygen, and next structure is the oxyhemoglobin. It is also the unstable compound. Next, oxyhemoglobin, free oxygen and hemoglobin. Then the oxyhemoglobin HbO2. Then HbO2 is also the reduced the Hb, hemoglobin and the oxygen. Here, dear students, after entering the blood capillaries, oxygen separates and penetrates into lymph by diffusion, first from the red blood corpuscles and then blood capillaries. Lastly, from the lymph, oxygen reaches the cell after penetrating the cell membrane. Here I also draw this. First structure is alveoli, second structure is the capillaries, third structure is the blood, and the enter the oxygen and it also reaches the capillaries and then the structure of lymph. Then the lymph is also penetrating the cell's membrane and then the oxygen enters the cells. It's also the another names of absorption of oxygen. Our next topic is carbon dioxide, transport of carbon dioxide. Here, carbon dioxide transport. Carbon dioxide is produced by the oxidation of food. Here, the oxidation of food, basically we also know chapter 4 about the respiration. There the oxidation of food, that means that it's also the cell and it's also the food. I also give the example about the carbohydrate. From the carbohydrate, here C6H12O6, it's also the another name is glucose, and when the oxygen enters this structure also the reduced. Here I also break this structure 6-oxygen. Then the structure of the carbon dioxide is produced by the oxidation of food. Then this structure is the breaking and its also new structure is the carbon dioxide. This structure, this carbon dioxide at first diffused through the cell membrane into the lymph. Then the lymph carbon dioxide enters the blood plasma through capillary diffusion. Carbon dioxide is mainly transported by carbonate. Bicarbonate, that means sodium bicarbonate and the potassium bicarbonate. As sodium bicarbonate, I just write this sodium bicarbonate and NaHCO3. It also this structure is basically plasma or the blood plasma, and another structure is, I also write this, the another structure potassium bicarbonate. Here I also write this potassium bicarbonate. It's also situated the blood corpuscles. Here the students please see the books. Carbon dioxide is mainly transported as bicarbonate by blood plasma as sodium bicarbonate and by red blood corpuscles as potassium bicarbonate to the lungs. In the lungs, the carbon dioxide is released from bicarbonate and passed to the alveoli. Then carbon dioxide is forced out, diffusing through blood capillaries and alveoli. Dear students, I also give you the very important topics. Our very important topic is the breathing. How can human breathe and how can oxygen and carbon dioxide is reduced and produced. Everyone learn it very attentively. Thank you.